Welcome to ASM Connected, the podcast brought to you by ASM Technologies. In Series 3, we sit down with business leaders and futurists from across the globe to discuss what emerging tech means to them, how technology impacts workplace culture, and their advice to businesses on how to stay one step ahead of the competition. In this episode, Iain Tomkinson chats to Terence Bennett, the General Manager of Dream Factory Software, discussing cybersecurity, emerging technologies and innovation within the tech sector. Previously, he ran operations at Integrate.io and TeamPassword and worked on Google's offensive security Red Team. He served in the US Navy and Navy Intelligence Officer and Surface Warfare Officer during Operation IraqiFreedom.
Hi Terence, welcome to the ASM Connected podcast. I believe it's good morning to you.
Yes, Ian, thanks for having me. I'm a pleasure to be here.
One of the things that we're here to sort of try and look at is emerging technology, innovation, and today we've got a particular angle on cybersecurity, emerging technologies, particularly from probably a different angle than we've approached cybersecurity before, because we're always looking for a different angle, different opinions. And again, these are just different people's opinions so that we can all sort of try and understand a little bit more about the complex world that is the tech sector out there. So I'm going to start with something, a really nice, easy, settle-in question. Obviously, having spoken to you before, looking at your background, you served in the US Navy as an intelligence officer. So how do you get from being in the US Navy and serving your country to leading a software business? Because they're very, very different, I should imagine.
They are very different. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's a funny story. I guess it was probably 5-6 years into serving, I decided it was going to be time soon for me to leave active duty and do something else to find sort of new challenges. And I was deeply interested in technology. You know, I grew up building computers as a kid, and I was always drawn to work in tech. And so it was actually a real challenge when I got out to find a job in the sector I wanted. I ended up taking a job as an executive assistant at Google on their Google Cloud team, and it was an incredible opportunity to learn from some of the world's best. I worked for a director of product management and his team, and it allowed me to sort of cut my teeth in tech, and then started to build a network within the company. And within less than 2 years, I was on to Google's Red Team. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage that path for people unless you're ready to kind of put your nose to the grindstone in that kind of way. But for me, I'd done similar work, EA type work in the Navy, and it came easily to me. And it was just an incredible way to see inside an organization, see its priorities, see how it worked, see the culture. Every organization has a little bit of the bureaucracy that keeps things going. And
Absolutely.
Executive assistants are typically kind of front and center to that. So yeah, it was an incredible way to see the inner workings. And then from there saw that, hey, startups are a really interesting way to get even closer to the bleeding edge, get closer to that exciting emerging technology. And so I made the jump, and a lot of the operations work I saw in the Navy translated very well over to a startup. As a naval officer, you're given a team and you're expected to take what resources you have and to make it work, right? And that's actually quite similar to a startup, right?
Absolutely.
So my first job was working as a gunnery officer. My second job was working as an engineer, auxiliaries officer. I worked with on a lot of sort of technical teams. And at the end of the day, it was about taking a small team and motivating them and taking what the resources were at your disposal and executing on the mission. And so it actually translates quite well, interestingly enough.
Yeah, no, I fully get that. And interestingly, I speak to a lot of people, particularly obviously in the tech sector, and not many people actually set off to actually do a career in the tech sector. A lot of people fall into it by, I suppose, chance, particularly in sales. Everyone starts off and, it's a weird path that a lot of people take to get to there. So you're one of the very few that have actually said, I'd like to work in the tech sector and this is what I'm going to do. And thankfully, I think I did the same. I could see the future of it, and I really wanted to get involved with that. And sales was my route in. So yeah, but there's not many people that have chosen to end up particularly in sales. But I don't think it's the key offering when you're at high school anyway. But there we go. Interesting you mentioned there your time in the Google Red team. That sounds really quite cool and mysterious. I'm sure it is. So for a lot of the audience, some people will know what a red team is and the importance of that. Other people might not. Just for the benefit of the listeners, can you share what the core function of a red team is, please?
Absolutely. From what I've read, actually, it originated in the Navy, or in the military at least, with teams that were asked to essentially try and penetrate a base. So to break in and steal something, just to demonstrate how would a threat actor actually go ahead and do this. And so at a certain point in any organization's cybersecurity journey, they will realize that they've sort of built the walls as high as they can. They've patched as many of the holes in those walls. They've developed the internal systems to try and detect an intruder when they get in. Now they have to start testing it. And at Google, it started in 2009 after a pretty high profile attack. And it started with something called the Orange Team, which were sort of part-time, like 1 week exercises where engineers, typically security engineers, would try and attack some specific part of the architecture. And that lasted for years and years until some Orange teamers became sort of full-time red teamers. At first it was 1 or 2, and then it sort of built out into this team. And so I was the first program manager hired on the US team to help sort of build out that program and build out the documentation and build out the process so it could be done repeatably and efficiently. And the biggest thing is when you go through this whole attack, actually documenting every piece of it. And so at every sort of turn through that attack, you can say, this is what enabled this attack, and this is what was actually effective, right? Or you put this sort of guard in place expecting it to act this way, but it actually acted that way. And so it didn't actually function the way you expected, right? And so it acts, so the red team at sort of a high level is doing 2 key things. It is finding bugs, it is finding vulnerabilities, but it is far and away the most expensive way to possibly find vulnerabilities in your system. So if that's all you're looking for, there's better ways of doing it. The other key thing that red teaming is great for is acting as a sparring partner for your detection and response team. And so we would always be running exercises in lockstep with them, with DNR leadership. And occasionally they would find us, and their leadership would actually hold off on notifying them. And so they could actually have the team on call respond as though it were a real incident. And at a company like Google, you don't have intrusions. And so you end up with a team that's actually never kind of had that oh shoot moment, right? Where the pucker factor is super high and you're like, oh my gosh, I just found an attacker on the network, like code red, right? Mm-hmm. And so being able to simulate that as close to real life as possible is incredibly valuable. And so, yeah, that's a lot of what we did. It was a lot of fun, needless to say, and amazing team, amazing people.
So yeah, huge cat and mouse project basically, and okay, that's quite cool. And I suppose Google's a complex business, and from my perspective, there's different types of organizations, and I should think even more complex from a security perspective, especially as it's so many apps that provide upload content too, which has to surely increase the risk. And I'm sure Google is innovating and providing its own security solutions. But does it rely on a strong network of tried and trusted vendors in specialist areas such as identity, API, and those technologies? Or does it rely on a hybrid? How does that work? With obviously out giving out too much away.
Yeah, absolutely. Google's really entirely homegrown. It's actually quite impressive how much they've built, and because they invented a lot of this early technology going back a decade, there's actually kind of no architecture quite like Google's as well, because so much of it was homegrown when this technology didn't even really exist in the sort of public market, or private market, but sort of public space, right? So everything's more or less homegrown, and it's why you see a lot of really interesting coming out of Google. Obviously, they were first to come to market with a lot of authentication identity technology around Google Workspace. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Advanced Protection Program, but it's a way to lock down your Google Workspace account, and in an even sort of more significant way to mitigate attacks. And it requires the use of a YubiKey or a Titan key. That's their own brand of a physical hardware key.
Yep.
So long answer to say no, it's all homegrown. And I think it's part of the reason why it is such a challenging target, because you can't just apply like a typical kind of rootkit type, set of hacker tools to that environment and expect it to work. It's not consistent.
Okay, so just sort of rewinding back. So obviously, red teams are from my understanding, are notoriously full of convicted hackers who've had some success against the likes of the security services, and you hear these stories that they've hacked in and they've actually given them a job. Is that a little bit of a myth, or does that kind of thing actually happen?
Frankly, I don't know. I've never heard actual real life stories like that, but we definitely hire from the former security services for sure. And obviously I have that background as well. So
yeah, that kind of makes sense, because I suppose you're wanting a different mindset. You were wanting that sort of innovator, and that kind of somebody who's not necessarily going to play by the rules, which comes to, I suppose, as part of that team, are you allowed to play dirty and try some, all the tricks as a potential threat, or do you have to play by the rules a little bit?
So you bring up a really interesting point, which is a red teamer has to be able to kind of put on that adversary hat, right, and think about an attack from an attacker's perspective, right, which is a unique sort of challenge, especially if you spent 20 years working within a company and thinking like an internal Google engineer. But to answer your question, yes, we absolutely are able to, and we were giving sort of that privilege from Google leadership early on to mimic an attack exactly what it would happen, right? So you're talking about very, very sort of sophisticated and targeted phishing attacks, and you're talking about taking control of a employee's computer for a period of time, but doing it in a way that they're not caught on to what's going on and report it, right? Because that happens all the time too. If like I saw this weird behavior on my machine, and boom, you're caught, right? So I've seen all sorts of funny stuff from a rubber ducky, which is essentially like it would be like a USB drive that if you were to put into your computer would infect your drive. Putting a rubber ducky in line with a charging cable in a conference room. And so when people sit down at the conference room, they go to plug in the USB-C charging cable and boom, they're done, they're popped. Or finding a specific engineer on a team that we want to attack, and doing a deep dive into their online presence and finding all the things that they are interested in, and then building entire websites and entire campaigns around what we think they'd click on. And the one that jumps to mind is a woman who was very into cats and marathon running. And so we literally built a made up marathon around cats. Right?
Wow.
And so we built this entire website out and this entire sort of sign up form and everything else, only to send it only to her. So that way she would then click on the registration link and we could put an implant onto her computer that way.
And that shows you, I suppose, I've heard about the USB stick, and I've heard of, obviously, sort of wind back probably 7-10 years. One of the key giveaways was a really pretty looking USB stick, quite a cool one. It might have lots of different things. And the one that I used to hear about is that, you could basically, outside a large corporate building, just drop a couple of like that, and people go, "Oh, that's cool, I'm having that. Oh, I wonder if there's anything on it." Plug it in, and bang, you're in, basically. But when you sort of talk about the extent that those attackers will go to, it just sort of highlights how on your toes that you really need to be, because if someone is prepared, and it might be just one person, you might have somehow found out that one person worked for company X. Yes, you can go on their Facebook page. You can start to get a little bit of information, like you've just shared. If someone's into cats and marathon running, then you just need to send them a link about that, and then, well, hey, it's quite scary, really.
It is. For me, it goes to show that if you get big enough as an organization, you have to assume that you're going to have a breach at some point. You have to assume that. And so there's an entire then change in philosophy around the way that you're going to protect your infrastructure, and using what we call in the field, and as actually a military term, of defense in depth, right? And so at every sort of turn within every network, you need to lock down absolutely every sort of aspect of what way an attacker would be able to pivot and move around. And Google has instituted what they call zero trust architecture. I know that's become like it's a bit of a buzzword, right? But by forcing all users to use physical hardware keys and implementing zero trust, that requires that reauthentication, and that essentially every time you move between systems, they make it incredibly difficult for an attacker to move around. So at every sort of turn, you actually have to find a new victim, a new computer to breach, to move into like that next level or that next system, the parallel system, right? Versus a lot of networks, once you're in, you got a free for all, right?
Yeah.
And you need to have detection and response systems in place to kind of set up, like, if you will, the tripwires to when an attacker does move in, you can figure out how they got in, or at least where they are, right? And how to contain the breach. So, I mean, this is a conversation I have a lot with people. We have to get away from this idea that we can just build our walls taller and keep them all out. It's just not possible. Not if you're going to make it an enterprise sort of system and architecture usable by its employees.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, isn't it? Because you still need to be able to deliver a usable network to the users that has pace, but trying to keep everyone out. And I do think that is I'm seeing a lot more with I suppose some of the vendors that we speak to, and I think everyone's gone from, at the end of the day, it's going to happen to you at some point, but how do you limit that damage to something that is controllable? And when they have penetrated the network, how do we know where they came in? Because the chances are they might have been having a snoop for the next time they come in, and then they're going to do more damage. So how do we capture it? How do we control it? And also, if they do, what's happened to my data? Have they actually taken it? Because a lot of enterprise, particularly in that enterprise space, the issue that we see today is not the fact that somebody's been in, even though that's a significant issue, is that they don't know about it for months on end.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's, oh, my data's on the dark web, which then becomes a significant problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's and I suppose in terms of enterprise security is obviously complex and challenging, because those networks can be vast, extremely complex. Quite often, you've got legacy technology mixed in with the latest technology, and it can be really challenging. But can we remove a significant number of threats by getting the basic right, such as encryption, endpoint, API security is an example, which I know is an area of expertise for yourself. Can we get on top of that?
Absolutely. And I think you just sort of nailed a lot of it, right? I think everyone sort of is aware now around the need for encryption at rest. Encryption in transit can get a little more challenging, I think, for some legacy sort of enterprise environments where you're moving data internally. And so what we're seeing a lot of, and what my company does now, Dream Factory, is we are a platform largely for internal facing API management, but also external facing. And what we can do, and what we're seeing customers do every day is sort of rip out all of those custom, often unencrypted direct connectors into databases that can make a breach that much worse, because it's sort of this open connection at the database that is not audited and doesn't have sort of fine comb or fine sort of permission set within it. And by implementing REST APIs across your network, not only can you give apps only the exact data they need access to, it's all encrypted, it's all set up with role-based access. You can rate limit it. So if there is a breach, you can make sure that it's minimized. Just last month, Twitter had a massive breach of 37 million records, or maybe it was 37 million customers records, so even more records than that. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is clearly they didn't have rate limiting set up, because whatever the API that did have a vulnerability in it was supposed to be serving, I can be pretty sure it wasn't 37 million records, right? And if with simple controls in place, a lot of these horrendous breaches like that would be mitigated to the point where they'd be newsworthy, but barely, right? And I think that's, to your point about like getting the basics right. We can't live in this world anymore where things are just kind of open and there's this like open trust within the network. To go back to this idea of like zero trust, you have to put in controls at every single place. And there's a ton of tools, and REST APIs are this wonderful open technology that there's a million open source tools to use and build off of. And obviously then on like the security side, there's a ton of really powerful tools that allow you to lock them down.
Yeah, and thankfully that is something, believe it or not, even though I'm a humble sales guy, I have heard of REST APIs. I've been working with a number of vendors over a number of years. So yeah, I am familiar with that technology and the additional security that can provide. And they're typically, historically anyway, and I think, organizations such as your own are probably making it more accessible. But I think historically, that technology has been very, very expensive and probably only accessible to the really large enterprise organizations and government and federal organizations. And I think that's probably been the challenge. Whereas I think, say, organizations like yourself are making that technology more accessible to probably your normal sized enterprise rather than the global businesses. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I would say so. I think what you end up with is startups are, who are building sort of native, find it very easy to build with APIs in mind. And often there's actually a bunch of great new platforms where if you're building your app within this platform, it's going to have like a built-in database connected to it and a built-in API. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if you've got a really robust API program, you might have, hundreds of engineers working on APIs. You can obviously afford to build out really robust security. But it's those companies caught in the middle where they don't have the money to build out a robust team to do this. So maybe they haven't even thought about monetizing their data via API because the ROI is not quite there yet. And so tools like Dream Factory, and like I said, there's a ton of other really powerful tools, a lot of which are open source, are making that much, much more readily available. And just the rise of tools like Postman that exist to help customers manage the APIs they're ingesting kind of go to show how incredibly prolific this technology is. And it's interesting because a lot of people haven't even heard of APIs, but it's kind of the connective tissue that powers the internet, right? Because how are you going to be able to share your internal data, your IP, with a partner, with a vendor, if you're not going to do it in a hyper secure way? So it's that trust that allows companies to really work together and tie their systems together in powerful ways.
Yeah, actually, we've worked with a vendor for many years who's they provide a secure API gateway device, and it's now they've also got a platform now, but they used to have a physical product, and it's to kind of military standard, so it's FIPS accredited and really robust, and obviously the renewal was coming up for the support and the maintenance, and this one company came along and went, we don't want to pay for the additional support and the maintenance on this device. We're going to get this third party to do it. And I was like, okay, that's really great but it's got a tamper-proof device on it. So if anyone apart from the vendor themselves tries to take it, it's just going to shut it all down. So unless you know something that we don't, by all means crack on. But it's when you're talking about that level of security and the kind of solutions that you're looking at, particularly to a military or higher end enterprise standard, someone comes along with a bright idea like that and it just isn't going to work. But hey, you live and learn. But that was one of my stories from a few years ago. In terms of emerging tech as a whole, it creates this huge cat and mouse game. And the technology is created for, technology, we're creating technology to gain improvements. It might be savings efficiencies. It might be, I suppose, IoT is a great example. I've got a few contacts who are in that space, and, they're talking about an IoT device and a storm drain, so they can predict the flow of water and let you know if there's a problem in the storm drain or anything like that. And I suppose the bad guys, as I'll call them, for the purpose of the podcast, and very simplistic, I know, but the bad guys are kind of looking to exploit those spaces, as it's often overlooked by security, I suppose, specialists. And it's probably a new technology, and the term I'll use is the belt and braces approach to, I suppose, that kind of solution is kind of quite unusual. We don't want to restrict innovation. So how can the enterprise have a strategy that enables them to run with emerging technology, but also offering robust protection? And I know I'm not going to get a simple answer to a very complex question like that, because that doesn't tend to be the case. But endpoints, be it IoT, be it a user, the more and more sort of spaces we create, the chances are that we're going to create more of a space for someone to get into. So how do we control that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting question. I think often the answer is to work with trusted vendors who have thought through these problems and thought through how to maneuver in this new space in a way that is that's responsible and thoughtful and deliberate, right? I mean, the only other option really is to try and hire those people into your team and do it, right? Um, and I think the other thing is, frankly, to be deliberate about what you choose to implement within your system. I think what can get dangerous and just as a waste of money is kind of running after every new exciting, seemingly exciting technology and thinking that if it's new and exciting, you need it within, to kind of add on to your product, right? I mean, the joke in the Valley for a long time has been every new startup is like such and such with AI, with ML, right? It's like we're going to just sort of tack on this ML engine next to onto like a boring product, and it's going to suddenly be cool and new. And it's obviously not that simple. And a lot of those companies are failing right now because they actually didn't have anything special, unique. So I think the question is to go back to first principles, and if you're a leader in your company and the company is looking to you for that strategic guidance, is really go back to first principles and ask that question on like, what is our strategic advantage and how would this help? And if the answer isn't something profound, then maybe it's worth just letting it go and not worrying about it for the time being, right? Revisiting in a quarter or two. And so, like, I think this sort of race that we're seeing right now with regard to AI is a really interesting one. There's obviously a million startups popping up left and right using OpenAI's ChatGPT and GPT-3 and soon to be GPT-4. I think a lot of companies need to kind of slow down and just ask, like, okay, how does this change the market? How does this change our environment? And does it actually change what we're doing, right? OpenAI has been around for some time, right? The only reason everyone's so excited about right now since November 30th or whatever it was because of the chat tool that kind of made it more interactable. But these models have been around, and there's companies who've been figuring out how to use it to add value. So I think it's maybe about even slowing down a little bit in what feels like a really kind of chaotic and crazy rushed world, and asking these deep questions around like, what does this actually change? How does this actually affect my business?
Okay, so you've brought me onto a great subject, obviously very, very topical. AI, Chat GPT. I have had a tinker myself and had a bit of a play with it. But I was listening to a podcast the other day, the other weekend, and the guy on there was a coder. He knew his way around artificial intelligence, and he actually said, "I tested it. He said, I asked it to write a piece of code to solve this problem in Python. And he said, it came up. He said, not only did it tell me write the code, which I wanted it to do, it actually said, unlike other coders, it actually told me what bit was functioning to do what part of the problem. And he said, I've been writing in Python for 10, 15 years. And he said, it wrote it as well as I possibly could. So I was thinking, bringing this back to the security conversation, as I suppose a layman's person, I'm not a coder. Could I ask something like ChatGPT to write a string of code to get me into someone's network without having the skills to do it? In theory.
In theory, sure. But what it's ultimately doing is it's looking across the Python sort of repositories. It's looking across all of the literature out there around cybersecurity and best practices of cybersecurity, and it's applying that knowledge to whatever sort of system you're talking about. So what I would argue is it makes people like this gentleman much more efficient because he's been coding for 15 years. He actually understands what's going on, and he can then apply that code and be all the more efficient. And it can get people who maybe don't have the ability to code, but sort of conceptually understand what's going on and can create scripts for them that are useful. What it's not going to be able to do is anything novel because it's only based on what people have previously done. And the reason it's so effective in Python is because Python is, I think it's fair to say, the most well-documented language out there. There's an absolutely incredible amount of repos and thoughtful documentation around what's out there and what you can do with Python. And so ChatGPT is very good at finding you common vulnerabilities in code. What it's not going to find you, I think this is fair to say, and I'd actually love for your audience if they could correct me on this. I don't think it's going to find a 0 day because by very nature, a 0 day hasn't been found. So what it can't do is anything remotely novel, right? What it can do is recreate what people have recreated multiple times or created multiple times in the past and documented very, very well. And so I love the sort of meme of ChatGPT is not going to take your job, but somebody using it will. Because I think that's really the world we're coming to, is it's going to be this incredibly powerful kind of co-pilot, to borrow the GitHub branding, right? It's going to be incredibly powerful at helping people who work in Excel every day create even better, more robust, more resilient Excel formulas. It's going to help coders move faster and automate a lot of like the simple infrastructure and simple code that gets out in their way, so they can spend more time thinking really hard and deep around some of the challenging problems that they're facing. And that sort of list goes on, right? It gets a little more sort of trickier around content, right? But once again, like, there's a million stories out there of ChatGPT writing content that's just incredibly just wrong, like fundamentally wrong. And does it with a tremendous amount of confidence and sort of eloquence. And so what you need is those subject matter experts to deeply understand what it's talking about and be able to correct it, right? And so I think there's a place for it in this ecosystem, and it reminds me of a story I heard about when calculators first were introduced into classrooms. People threw up their arms and said, how are we going to teach math anymore, right? Obviously, they found a way to teach math, and I think the average student is doing much higher level math than they could have done pre-calculator, and I think that's the world we're in.
Yeah, and I read a fascinating article, and it was from somebody at Google the other day, and it basically explained it in layman's terms as to why ChatGPT can get so much right, and you've kind of highlighted that, but also why it can get certain things wrong. And I think it was down to the story was down to data compression, and the way that data compression works is quite simple. And sometimes when you compress data and you compress it and you compress it, you lose some of its authenticity or credibility, effectively. And then basically the argument was ChatGPT is trying to compress the entire internet. So, as you said, all those things that are repeated time and time again, like Python, like I suppose a language, like might be a formula in Excel or something like that, they're repeated time and time again. So it can, even without that compression, it will work really, really well. However, you try and bring in a little bit of innovation or something in there, that's when it's going to absolutely fall down, because it can't innovate, because it's not an intelligent being. It's just using that compressed data that's already out there.
Mm-hmm.
The article read it a lot better than I'm sort of explaining that to you now, but it actually made sense to me, and I was like, oh, that's why it can't handle that, but it can handle that, because it's that kind of that compression. And you know how much data is out there on the internet. You're never going to be able to compress all that and get a decent answer on one small question out of it. So
yeah, it does make sense. But it goes back to this idea of it's really good at pattern recognition and doing what's been done in the past. Yeah. And what it's not going to do is invent us a new technology, not without a lot of hand-holding, right? From intelligent humans who are thinking, 2 to 3 steps ahead.
Yeah, cool, okay. And I suppose we've covered off, I suppose one of the, I suppose the big sort of topics in emerging tech there. But coming back, have you, in your sort of journey, be it in security, in AI, or whatever, have you come across any startup technologies that have made you think, "Wow, that's brilliant"? It might be a technology or a piece of software. Have you come across anything?
There's a ton of really exciting stuff going on. One of which is some labs are working on ways to code with biology, essentially using the building blocks of the way our bodies are built, being actually sort of in understanding how the signals between cells and between those building blocks work, can actually sort of build at that level. And I think that's going to be a really, really exciting technology we'll see evolve over the coming years. I'm not a biologist, which is maybe why it's so absolutely fascinating to me. But this idea of kind of getting to a level of understanding of biological functions and like cellular level, to be able to then kind of mimic the way the body manipulates those kind of otherwise kind of dumb building blocks, and being able to build that way, to me, is absolutely fascinating. Yeah, that's one I came across recently that just kind of blew my mind. But you can get excited about quantum computing. I think that's some ways away. The obvious answer is what we're seeing with OpenAI. Like that's the one I talk about over with friends over beers and stuff. I was having a conversation yesterday with some neighbors. But yeah, there's wildly crazy stuff happening in every sort of sector, in every corner of the economy.
Yeah, and that biology-based sort of connection. We've worked with a futurist, a guy called Matt Griffin, and Matt is look him up. I would recommend anyone looking at Matt's work. He's a great guy. He covers lots and lots of different topics. He's absolutely amazing, full of energy, and we were lucky enough to have him to present at an event for us in the summer just gone. And one of the things he was talking about was DNA-based storage.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way that a string of code, obviously DNA is just a string of code in terms of how we're made up biologically, and people are using a similar process to be able to store, I suppose, data. And Matt explained that, and we had a number of guests at the event, and you could just see the look on people's faces like, wow, that is so cool. And so many people came over to us after the event and I mentioned it afterwards. But yeah, I think that is quite cool. So I'm glad someone else has picked up on that. But Matt Griffin, he's a great guy, and I know he'll appreciate the shout out. So yeah, have a look at some of his stuff.
I will, definitely.
Coming to a very obvious question, I suppose, to someone who's involved with security, should organisations have someone at board level, senior management, that has medium to advanced understanding of cybersecurity risks? And can people like an enterprise's reseller and system integrator partners do more to assist, in your opinion?
Absolutely. Every company needs somebody who's cybersecurity literate to deeply understand how their systems fit into this larger ecosystem, and where they can add value, but also where they might actually be a vulnerability, depending on or liability, probably is a better word, in a system. And I equate it to the fact that we live in a system, a cultural and social construct where laws are the sort of prevailing method of resolving conflict, and you would need a lawyer on your board. To not have a lawyer on the board would be absolutely, insane. And so we live in, I think, a world today where, or at least pretty close, where cybersecurity has the same level of technical specificity, and you'd be at fault of negligence if you didn't have somebody who deeply understands those ideas and those concepts, and how your system and your solution and your product fit into that world. Because otherwise, it's just you're asking for some pretty big blind spots and problems.
Yeah, and I suppose the key thing is that not every startup, not every organization that can afford that. So that's where the role of the reseller and the system integrator, with access to all those technologies, vendors, partners, I suppose, can support that process. Because it's every head counts in a startup, and sometimes there's a difference between survival and failure. But but yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I think larger organisations, we are seeing it more and more, and I think we're all seeing the CISO sort of role becoming commonplace these days, particularly in the enterprise. So yeah, no, I'd wholly agree with you. And just to sort of, I know we could talk all day about the various different technology and some of the cool stuff that's out there. Conscious of time, and I know you've still got the whole day ahead of you. I've got a couple of just very quick fire questions here, just to sort of wrap up the podcast, and we can get you on your way as such. So I suppose technology. I speak to a number of people that are passionate about technology for good. Some people are also thinking that technology is going to finish us all off, and that AI is going to go wild and crazy. Particularly if you speak to someone down the local pub at the weekend, they're all petrified of it. What's your thoughts? Is technology going to kill us all at the end, or are we going to have more tech for good?
I'm a self-proclaimed techno-optimist, so I don't think I'd be in this field if I didn't believe it was not only going to free us of a lot of the constraints of like the human condition around disease and pain and what a lot of people sort of experience as misery in this world. I think it has, I think it has the ability to enrich our lives in most sort of profound ways. And like I said, I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't feel that way. So yeah, I'm definitely for tech.
Great, good stuff. And in terms of tech, what's your favorite tech gadget?
So I guess in line with that, I'm a huge sort of biohacker. I love trying to sort of measure my own body and measure how different inputs change my sort of experience, right? Whether that's just how I feel, how I sleep, how I'm sort of experiencing the day. So Fitbit, I think, is my gadget of choice because I'm wearing one right now, and I play around with a lot of different things like continuous glucose monitors to measure my glucose over the day based on different things that I eat, and I can see how different foods affect my body and affect my energy. But the Fitbit is this incredible tool that is very accessible. Entry level Fitbit costs $100 new. I think you probably get one for half that on eBay, and it gives you so much insight into your body and how you're reacting to the day, how you're sleeping. So it's like an entry level kind of a gateway drug, if you will, to this sort of biohacking scene and the ability to really kind of dial in your own experience and your own the way you're living your life.
Yeah, I've got one of the I got some. I'm an Android guy, and I've got one of Samsung Galaxy. Yeah, and it is kind of quite scary of how much information you do get. I had a Garmin before that, and that was even more scary. Yeah, particularly if you do a bit of exercise, or go out for a run, and you start looking at the your recovery time from doing certain exercises, and yeah, it's kind of quite scary, but also, as you say, it's quite informative, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who do have health conditions that there's a huge benefit. Talking about glucose monitoring, I've got a family member who's type 1 diabetic, and the way that technology is really helping them to sort of monitor that condition with real-time scanning. You don't even have to need to do a finger prick these days. You can literally do you will scan your arm with a phone, and you quite often see people walking around with a little white disc on their arm. And it's absolutely crazy. Now, I believe that technology as well comes off from was copied from the inkjet printer. The way that the insulin pump works, and it can give that very precise dose of medicine. The technology was stolen off an inkjet printer. So there you go.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That's incredible. Yeah, and so my reference to the continuous glucose monitor was there's a bunch of startups that now sell that as a service. So I did 1 month of wearing one, and I learned that I'm pretty sensitive to carbohydrates, for instance, and that the way my body was reacting wasn't sort of what I was concerned around, which was like potential pre-diabetes. It was actually the opposite, because my body was becoming sort of hypoglycemic after eating large amounts of carbs. What a powerful thing to know, and be able to control now, and actually just for me have like the why under the why. Not just like this is the thing I'm experiencing, I can react to it, but actually deeply understanding why.
That's tech for good, I'm sure. Healthcare and all those other great industries. Brilliant to have you on the show today. Really, really appreciate your time. Great talking to you. So we could talk all day about the different technologies and things out there. Great overview. Thanks for your time, Terence. Really appreciated. I hope you have a good day, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Iain. Yeah, I appreciate being on. It was a lot of fun. Have a good one.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of ASM Connected with guest Terence Bennett. If you've enjoyed this episode, subscribe now to make sure you never miss an update, and check out the other episodes in the series. To find out more about the team at ASM Technologies, visit asmtech.com. This is ASM Connected.